Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is simply called Discerning What is True. I am going to be reading a book called Psychology and Kabbalah tonight. This will be chapter 17. This will be the title of the chapter is Ego Foundation. Phil Lang is the one who encouraged me to look into this. Phil Lang is a great guy. A good person. He's done much for me. He's a big blessing to me. So we're going to go ahead and get started here, like I said, and begin to read this particular portion of the book. This guy wrote this particular book here, and his name is Zev, Z-E-V, Rex. Zev Ben Shimon Halevi. Shalevi, and this is actually on Thames and Hudson books out of London, England. So the title again is called Ego Foundation. The Da-Yasat complex of the ego, placed at the center of the electromagnetic triad of the body, and the action, thinking, and feeling triad of the lower psyche, can be seen as a facilitator to everything that passes between the two levels of reality. This ranges from the most gross sensory impressions and motor reactions through the through the current preoccupation of the attention to the finest and most faint influences and recollections of the upper worlds. During the period of infancy, the ego is as yet unformed and therefore cannot differentiate between experiences, so that everything is mixed until a recognizable picture of the outer world begins to emerge. As we have seen, this is constructed by sensual experience and motor response that is gradually turned into a coherent set of physical and psychological maneuvers to solve practical problems and begin to relate to the world. In the very young infant, the sense of me is almost totally lacking for everything from bowel movement to the passage of day and night, and related to general expression in which the infant is the center. Over time, this starts to differential into me and not me. The me arises from the fact that as the infant learns how to live in the physical world, it begins to respond psychologically. In Kabbalistic terms, the action triad starts to fill up with a series of formula of how to do things as the thinking triad develops methods and tools of thought, while the feeling triad learns to experience different moods. All these processes occur at the Yazarati level. And so what is observed is a gradual intermission set of forms that back up, feed into, and absorb what is passing through the ego. Such events as being burned by a flame are not only responded to by the sensor motor system of the side pillars, but are filed in the action triads as what not to do. In the thinking triad is bad but interesting, and in the feeling triad is frightening but exciting. Myriads of impressions of the outside world pour into the ego, but only those of outstanding interest are remembered. This does not mean to say that many things are not unconscionable learned. The Had, Mazad, and Makub triad of the psyche takes in an enormous amount from the child's environment, and this is filed directly into the emotional and conceptual triads as background experience, so that a Moravian child takes on quite a different cultural view from the Spanish child just across the Strait of Gibraltar. Each will gather much about the customs and values of Islam and Christendom without being aware of more than a series of flickers of consciousness that accumulate in both the individual and collective mind beyond the had and Nasad threshold line. As they grow, as the ego grows, it develops a sense of continuality through memory. This means that the forms that each experience penetrate begin to be stored in some sort of order within the psyche. Thus, while the earliest experience creates certain feelings, thoughts, and actions which are unrelated, later ones begin to be connected together by association. Initially, these clusters of memories are very loose because the child has as yet no capacity to coordinate its psyche. However, as the mind is based upon the separate, an inevitable order begins to prevail as the psyche seeks equilibrium and develops. Thus, experiences that are negative or restrictive accumulate on the left side of the psychological tree, and those that are positive and stimulating go to the right. Those that have a conceptual dimension are attracted to the intellectual triads, while those of emotional nature congregate in their respective active and passive triads. These groups of complexes, I should say, are based upon nuclear experience that from major influences in people's lives, which in turn relate to one of the separate that form the archetypal principles, but more of this later. Through memory, which is based upon all that has passed through the ego, the infinite learns to anticipate the future. Slowly but surely, the ego recognizes when and when not to do certain things. Out of a mass of incomprehensible things that it has experienced, there emerges the realization that it can attain certain results. It holds back its impulses because time has taught it that to do this or that at the wrong moment is counterproductive. Gradually, the confusion of the early months abates at physical rhymes, such as feeding and sleep. Give it a sense of time and the focus and image of the world, and especially its mother. Give it a sense of space. As the acronym of thoughts, feelings, and actions begin to integrate, so the infant starts to recognize its position of helplessness and dependency. The anger observed in babies, it must be said, may not always be to infantile needs and moods. It may be the frustration of a mature psyche that periodically realizes what it has to go through, but before it even recognizes as an adult. As one great Kabbalist observed, I was born an old man. Many people have this experience in early childhood. However, all the incarnation processes have to be gone through, especially the development of the ego, which is vital if one is to perform well in the world of action. So you see, the ego is used for a purpose of being able to be active, to make decisions and take action about certain things. This is why in the Kabbalistic tradition, the ego is not regarded as evil, but trained to be good, to be a good servant. The process of learning, by the way, that's the interesting perspective, because today, most people have a negative connotation of the ego. In fact, it's gone to the ultimate extreme. When you need to have an ego, now there's certain moments you don't need to have the ego. But the problem simply is people have actually put a negative onus upon that, not realizing simply is that if you don't have an ego, you won't pick up the ball. You won't do anything. You will be like a sitting nut. You just sit there. You won't learn. You won't learn anything. You won't develop. So you need the ego. The problem, the ego can go from one extreme to the other. You have to understand that. We've come in with a prejudice against the ego too, and it's not beneficial. And I know there's detrimental parts too. I agree with that, but it seems as though everything's negative to do with the ego. In a child, the constraints are applied by the parents because as yet there's not enough experience in the psyche for it to observe itself. The differentiation between ego and self, or Yesod and Tiferet, comes much later. Until that time, the parents act in the place of self. Thus, modes of useful behavior are acted out by most parents, even if they do otherwise in private, in order to give a child a model by which they will fit into that family and society. This process of interjection, as it's called, is observed by the growing ego from quite early on, so that it copies acceptable forms of acting, thinking, and feeling in order to be assimilated and given what it needs. Besides learning how to behave in the outside world, the ego also begins to develop a interior capability. When the phase or abstract thought and imaginative is reached, so the manipulation of symbols becomes possible. Initially, the individual who has been incarnated has, as we are told, quite a clear memory of the prenatal epoch. This is never forgotten, but it is superseded by sensor impressions of the new incarnation and all the problems of adjustment. Thus, there must be a period in which the older memories and the newer ones blend, and this appears to be worked through in the very active imagination of infants. Most young children, for example, take the dreams very seriously, and when they are awake, often claim to see and talk with beings adult cannot perceive. This may or may not be true, but whatever it is, it certainly has a reality to the child. Seen Kabbalistically, these phenomena occur beyond because Yesod is the bridge between two worlds, and its screen of consciousness is designed to produce images from either, for example, the sense impression of a room after being processed by the body and brain is in its own way no more than a very limited picture, whereas the imagery of many dreams and works of art are sometimes more potent than anything found in the physical world, especially in nightmares or movies. In a mature adult, the ego can separate out either reality. In the case of the child who cannot yet tell the difference, parental care provides both orientation and protection. For the adult who has not learned to differentiate fantasy from reality, life can be very hard as impossible ambitions are thwarted and idealized relationships break down. If these lessons are not learned, then the immature ego can regress in neurosis or psychosis back to the childlike stage at which it was stuck or fixated as it drifted between two worlds. In a normal ego formation, the successes and failures of adapting in life in the body create a strong and resilient identity. Learning to cope with physically is not easy, but the struggle to survive develops many useful skills, attitudes, and approaches to both external and internal reality. In some cases, conditions are so hard that the ego never grows beyond the infantile reaction of survival, often found in deprived families. On the other hand, if a person is overprotected by wealth or privilege, this can produce a spoiled or childish ego that only recognizes its own needs. These incidents, however, have a karmic factor, as does the more normal situation where the yasada image of the world is in a balance between the level of an individual development and what they can cope with. For example, a school child is not generally aware of the international political situation, but he or she can deal with a playground crisis or examination. Out of this comes the image of identity that is based upon what is expected in a child's society and how this is met. Thus, there is usually a school hierarchy for sport, artistic, and scholarship, and a dozen other subsystems in which individuals find themselves as a superior or inferior place. This role is the ego image, which may or may not coincide with what the person is at a deeper level, but it is what the person takes up and projects in order to hold a place in their world. This assumes personality, moreover, can vary accordingly to different circumstances, so that in one situation, persona or mask is aggressive in a peer group where the individual is predominant, but subservient at home where he or she is the smallest in a large family. The ego of a growing infant is susceptible to many influences. With the right condition, it can become the perfect servant and foundation of a life. Under extreme duress or excessively easy circumstances, it can become crippled. Here, as said, we have to take into account the factor of fate. No one can entirely blame the situation into which they were born. There are people who have grown well in the most difficult environments and others who have failed to make the most of an ideal situation, not because it was too easy, but because they were too lazy. This introduces the recurring element of choice. Behaviorists would argue that there is none, and nativism might say inherited knowledge removes decision. The Kabbalist sees the situation as the interaction of the laws of Assyria and Barai with the psyche and Yetzirah. In between, free will is the principle of adjustment based upon what the ego has perceived in a two-way mirror of internal and external consciousness. However, beyond the ego can be relied upon to give a clear and undistorted image. Several other stages have to be passed through before maturity or at this point. Yesod is still quite infantile in the perception of reality and its own identity. And that's going to be the end of that particular chapter, chapter 17. I'm going to take a little break here. So hold on just a second. I'll try to do chapter 18 at this point. A little later, I need to get something for my voice here. I'll be back in a few minutes. So thank you for being here. Again, this is works that Phil Lang has suggested to me to read and look into, and how children grow up. And this is all a Kabbalistic perspective here also, as this guy's there. I hope that I was hoping this week it would work out to do we would meet again this week, and it would have worked out. But I had an issue that came up with my house, so I had to deal with that issue. So a lot of times I'm not able to meet, and then there are other times that Phil cannot meet because he has different things to do also. So thank you for being here this evening, and we'll try to go to the next chapter, which will be chapter 18. All right. Wish you good night and take care.